buzzing through the walls, making their honey and singing their song. They say I worked for the queen all day. Yeah, I worked for the queen all day. Yeah.
Hello, the Queen Bee's Hive. Here I am with another chapter. Our first take on Chapter 9, Animal Nursery Tales. This is a really warm and joyful chapter, I think. It makes you feel like you're right there, part of the Fraser's Ridge community. So in this chapter, we get a lovely break from the tension and turmoil and hauntings and emotional gut punches that we had the last chapter to experience this like loveliness and joy with the family at the ridge, celebrating the raising of the roof, quote. It's a tarp, but oh, okay. We'll call it a roof. And the blessing of their hearth, cookie making, gift giving. It's very much a good Christmassy chapter for sure. It's a chapter filled with smiles and love and laughs and tenderness and this little scene-stealing star of the chapter, Miss Mandy Mackenzie. However, lest anybody think that this chapter is all fluff, even though we love the fluff, there are some terrific key information nuggets that are, as well as revelations of Bree's mysterious bag contents, namely the big one, which is Frank's book. I want to start out with this past Sunday. Diana included the opening section of this chapter for her second Sunday of Advent post. She usually, like each Sunday going into Christmas, she does a post and she explains what each Sunday of Advent means. So for this past week, for the second Sunday of Advent post, she did this post that included the opening of this chapter. But to introduce the post, she said, during this season of introspection, we consider and appreciate the things that support and bind us in love, memories of our past, the presence of family and friends in our lives, and the contemplation of our futures together. And then she did this opening of this particular chapter. So this chapter is about exactly that. It's about an appreciation of the simple joys. That's very much the feel of this chapter. To get down to the basics, the simple pleasures of life, the simple things to be grateful for, the simple ways to celebrate. And a wonderful thing to treasure and remember, I think, at this time of year. It's very kind of appropriate we're reading this now. And isn't that what our favorite children's books are, like Animal Nursery Tales and Green Eggs and Ham? Those are like the simple joys you remember of childhood, of reading your favorite children's books. Even the love and appreciation of books itself is a simple joy compared to, the types of things, the entertainment that vies for our attention in today's world. The smell of molasses cookies baking because now they have a hearth. These are like the simple joys. Then she posts this brief opening excerpt which touches on all three of these elements that we should consider and appreciate, according to her, that support and bind us in love. So all three of these things, these three components that she says, are contained in this little excerpt that she posts. If you look, each one is featured in this excerpt. And so we're going to read this little beginning excerpt. And so look for these three things: memories of our past, the presence of family and friends in our lives, and the contemplation of our future together. Okay, you'll see all three of these in this opening part. We're in Claire's point of view, and we're 1 month forward from the last chapter, which is a little weird because it's like they've never told their story. They've never, given these gifts for a month. I guess I guess, she wanted to wait until they were doing this hearth blessing to give out these gifts. I guess that's the story there. But we know now, like, Macs have been there a month. Okay, so they're much more ingrained in the Ridge life at this point. They've been helping build this house. They've been helping get up the framing. Roger was there grabbing this hearthstone with Ian and everything to drag it up. So they've been plugged in for the last month in getting everything accomplished. And so she does something craft-wise here that I really want to point out to you before I read it so that you can look for what I'm saying. I wouldn't do this normally in a reaction thing, but because I noticed it on my first read, I'm bringing it out to you now. But this is the type of more in-depth things that I would do on our deep dives, that when we do it in, when we go and do this book in a deep dive. But I'm going to tell you this part now. In her introduction, you know how I said this is kind of a lot about the power of simplicity and all of that? In her very introduction of this chapter, that's called Animal Nursery Tales, which is a very simplistic, joyful type of memory from when you were a child and you were appreciating the little simple things that gave you joy, right? Which is kind of how I see this chapter. She does something craft-wise that drives that point home. She demonstrates the power of simplicity. And those of you out there that are writers, and I know I have some of you out there, like journalists, like Laura is a journalist. I know she'll appreciate what I'm saying. She opens the chapter with this very, very long and complex sentence that's a ridiculous 80-word long sentence, which, FYI, if you're not a writer, that's a huge no-no. If you want people to actually grasp what you are saying in the written word, you don't write 80-word long sentences. You just don't. It's not, the more complex your sentences are, the harder they are to grasp your intent that you're writing with. So you end up having to read it a few times to really kind of grasp all the nuance of the sentence, or you end up reading it once and you really didn't have a full comprehension of it, so that's kind of why you want to keep your average sentence length. That's one of the things we look at as writers, where you want to keep your average sentence length, because the higher that is, the harder it is to comprehend. And if you put too many together, it's definitely not good news. So she opens this chapter with this 80-word long sentence. But Diana does it here, which is a no-no, which like normally a writer would not ever do. Not a writer that wants to grab you from the beginning of a chapter. They wouldn't normally open it with an 80-word long sentence. But Diana does it with intention here, I believe. She knows the importance. I mean, Diana knows she's a writer and she understands very clearly, she's talked about it quite a bit, the importance of sentence length and rhythm and pace and all of that stuff in moving the reader effortlessly through the writing. However, she opens here with this long sentence. Why? Because the next 2 or 3 sentences immediately following this long sentence are extremely short. It's a draft. I mean, they're like literally 3 and 4 word sentences, and you get a few of them, or very paused, comma break sentences in very short chunks. So in between that, it almost seems like you have like these 4 or 5 like really 3 or 4 word sentences following this big 80 word long sentence. What that does is it makes those short sentences resonate really much more. You get a much harder punch on those short sentences if they're following this extremely long sentence like that. They resonate stronger because your processing in your mind will cling to the simplicity after trying to sort through a big complex sentence like that. If it gets like this short punch sentence to follow that, your brain like almost feels like it wants to kind of grab this one like core little content of a sentence and And it makes those sentences resonate stronger. And the messaging in those short sentences is what she really wants to drive home, you know? So by starting with that longer sentence, it puts more of a exclamation point on the short sentences. So as I read this, like I said, I normally would get into this like in the weeds craft stuff when I do a deep dive, along with like symbolism and all that stuff. But because I noticed it right away, I brought it up here because it was in my first take. So as I read this, note that intentional structure and note the three elements that Diana says support and bind us in love that she said was in this excerpt. Memories of our past, presence of family and friends in our lives, and the contemplation of our futures together. So I'm going to read this first part. It took a month rather than 2 weeks, but by the time the wild grapes began to ripen, Jamie, Roger, and Bree, with precarious ceremony and a lot of giggling from the groundlings below, tacked a large sheet of stained white canvas, salvaged and stitched together from pieces of the damaged mainsail of a Royal Navy sloop that was refitting in Wilmington when Fergus happened to be strolling along the quay, onto the framing of the new house's kitchen. We had a roof of our own. I stood under it, looked up for a long time, just smiling. People were trooping in and out, carrying things over from the lean-to, up from the Higgins cabins, out from the spring house, in from the shelter of the big log, down from the garden. It reminded me suddenly and without warning of making camp on an expedition with my Uncle Lamb, the same higgledy-piggledy bustle of objects, good spirits, relief and happiness, expectation. Jamie set the pie safe down, easing it gently onto the new pine floor so as not to dent or mar the boards. Wasted effort, he said, smiling as he looked up at me. A week and it'll be as though we've driven a herd of pigs through it. Why are you smiling? Does the prospect amuse ye? No, but you do, I said, and he laughed. He came to put an arm around me, and we both looked up. The canvas shone a brilliant white, and the late morning sun glowed along its edges. The canvas lifted a little, whispering in the breeze, and multiple stains of seawater, dirt, and what might possibly have been the blood of fish or men made the shadows that shimmered on the floor around our feet, the shallows of a new life. Look, he whispered, and nudged my cheek with his chin, directing my gaze. Fanny stood on the far side of the room, looking up. She was lost in the snowy light, oblivious to Atso the cat twining about her ankles in hopes of food. She was smiling. So that was just really beautiful, and you can see what I mean about that big long sentence in the front, and then you had these sentences right after that big long sentence. We had a roof, period, of our own, period. I stood under it looking up for a long time, period, just smiling, period. So you had these like exclamation points, and those are the things that are the most important thing, and so it kind of really the way she structured that was really interesting. And you also saw the three components. She remembers memories of her past. She remembers Uncle Lamb and when she was a child and having to put up the camp together. We see all of the people bringing in all of this stuff from all over the place. That's the presence of family and friends in our lives. And then at the end, them all looking up, contemplating this roof over them, and now they're going to have this home in the future. So it's really beautiful. So the joy of having this framing and finally a canvas roof, the beginning semblance of a house to blend with the love of this family to have a home, the joy of seeing Fanny, seeing a home take shape around her. And although she has the hole of missing her sister, she's just in awe of the first real home she's ever been a part of, the first one where she feels safe and she feels loved, and she feels like this is what this is all so new to her. She's never been surrounded by anything like this. And so it's so heartwarming to see her like just in awe of everything. So we see so much here that is such an effort to do all of this ceremony to bless this home and family, because everyone here knows what a treasure home is. Everyone here knows how fragile that can be, and how it's easy to lose, especially in these times, and so how quickly it can be destroyed. Look at Germaine with the print shop, the Frasers with their old house being, coming down, the Macks who had their house invaded and had to leave their home to come to this time to be safe, Fanny, who never even had a home, Jenny, who that basically up and left her home to come here and lost her other half, which made a home for her heart, So you just kind of look and you smile and you see them all kind of imagining a potential future ahead in this new home. So now we move to the hearth, and they have this giant piece of serpentine that the men had hauled down from the green spring the day before. And note that it's serpentine, okay, which is serpent-like, okay, which means snake, okay, which kind of is interesting, that she particularly used that for this book. I didn't miss that, Diana. Anyway, it's the symbolism of the serpentine stone, transformation, healing, and cleansing of negative energy, which we kind of see them doing here by using this for the hearth, for their new home. It says that Jamie, he made a furrow to bury the chisel. But as they were about to start, Claire sees a spider, and they kind of chivvy out that spider with a go with God from Jemmy. And we see a few interesting things here to note. Go with God, Jemmy said reasonably. What else do you say to a spider? What else indeed, said Jamie, patting Jem on the shoulder. He once more knelt by the open hearth and lifted a hand toward his daughter. Rather to my surprise, Bree kissed the chisel as though it were a crucifix and laid it gently in his hand. He also lifted it to his lips and kissed it as though it were his dirk, and then laid it gently in the burrow and scooped the dirt over it with his left hand. This is important. So he sat back on his heels again, looked deliberately from face to face. It was only the family present. Ourselves, Brianna and Roger, Jem and Mandy, Germaine, Fanny, Ian, Rachel, and Jenny holding a sleeping Anki. Bless thou, O God, the dwelling, he said, and each who rests here in this night. Bless thou, O God, my beloved ones in every place wherein they sleep, in the night that is tonight, and every night in the day that is today, and every day. May this sacred iron be witness to the love of God and the guarding of this house. So the first thing that I noticed was this double kiss on the chisel. From Bree, it's described from Bree as if it were a crucifix, and from Jamie as though it were his dirk. So if you tie that to the last line of the prayer, okay, where it says, to the love of God, it says, the last line of the prayer says, may this sacred iron be witness to the love of God, which kind of is a nod to Bree kissing it like a cross, and the guarding of this house, which is a nod to Jamie kissing his dirk, And so it's like each has vowed to care for family and home with the love of God and the physical protection from Jamie. So I kind of love that little nod there. Also note that he covered the iron back with the dirt using his left hand. Why is that? Because the left signifies evil and harm, like bad mojo, and you use the left, or you use counterclockwise movement. I should go like this, counterclockwise movement in a charm or blessing, when the intent of that charm or blessing is to cast off evil and to protect from harm. Okay. When you're trying to bring in the positive, you use your right hand. You know, when you're trying to bring in blessings and bring in abundance and bring in fertility, you use your right, and you use clockwise movements. When the purpose of what you're doing is to cast away evil, to protect from bad spirits, to, cast away bad luck and that type of thing, you use your left hand and you move counterclockwise. So that's why you see it very specifically say Jamie used his left. So in essence, he's burying, with his left hand and that iron, he is burying any ill will and harm that would come to this family. So then we see this little adorable bit. The solemn attention of the assembly lasted for roughly 5 seconds of silence. "Now we eat," Mandy said brightly. Jamie laughed with everyone else, but broke off and touched her cheek. "I must stop. But no until the hearthstone's laid. Stand back a wee bit out of the way." So I kind of love that. Andy is just so cute in this chapter. She is the star. So Ian, Roger, and Jamie all work together to heave this heavy-ass stone into place, and it's so cute. Jermaine and Jem, the men wannabes, are grunting with the men as they struggle with the stone, and they're going, as the men are out there doing it, which I thought was so cute. And you see Diana blending all of this ceremony and deep meaning with all of these things, mixed together with like a sense of reality of what actually would happen if there's these men struggling with this heavy-ass stone, and with humor, but they're not like shying away from the ceremony of everything. And so you see, here's the next little clip I'm going to read. "A lot of grunting, maneuvering, muttered directions, cries of alarm as the stone slipped, laughing and chattering among the spectators as it was caught. And then with a final gasp of effort, the stone was turned flat and dropped into place. Jamie was bent over, hands on his knees, panting. He straightened slowly, red in the face, sweating, running down his neck, and looked at me. 'I hope you like this house, Sassenach,' he said, and took a deep gulp of air, 'because I'm never building you another.'" I thought it was hilarious. So he's like, "This is it. You burn this one down. I'm done." So they gather around and they say this beautiful blessing. I'm not going to repeat it, but it's one of my favorites. And I know we have seen this before in the book somewhere, because I remember some dialogue around the line, "the angeling of my rest." I remember there being dialogue before about that. But I can't remember where I saw it, but I remember we had this poem. But it's a really beautiful blessing. It's one of my favorites in the books, and everyone contributes a stick to the first fire of the hearth. And so it's all really cool to see all these little ceremonial elements that bring all these positive vibes into this new home. And I have to wonder, what is Fanny thinking about all of this? How is she taking all of this in? You know what I mean? This is all so new to her. I wish we had her POV on some of this. I would love to have her POV. So we are celebrating after dinner with molasses cookies, which everyone is thrilled about, especially Mandy, who, like I said, lights up all the scenes that she's in this chapter. And holy moly, my girl has the Fraser temper strong, right? She wants her mom to read her a story while the cookies are cooking, and Roger and Bree look at each other kind of like conspiratorially, and they go for the bag, and Jamie's amazed that they make books for kids. So here's what she says. "I want my book," Mandy said firmly. "Give me, Daddy, please," she added, seeing her mother's mouth open. Bree shut her mouth and smiled, and Roger peered into the sack and then withdrew a bright orange book that made me blink. "What?" said Jamie, leaning forward to peer at it. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. I shrugged. He'd find out soon enough. "Read it, Mummy." Mandy curled into her mother's side, thrusting the book into Bree's hands. "Okay," Bree said, and opened it. "Do you like green eggs and ham?" "I do not like them, Sam I am." "What?" Fanny said incredulously and moved over to peer over Bree's shoulder, closely accompanied by Germain. What is that? Germain asked, fascinated. Sam, I am, Mandy said crossly and jabbed a finger at the page. He got a sign. Ah, oui. And what's the other thing then? Who are you? That made Fanny, Jemmy, and Roger laugh, which turned Mandy incandescent with rage. She might not have the red hair, I thought, but she had the Fraser temper in spades. Shut up, shut up, shut up, she shrieked. She scrambled to her feet, made for Germain with the obvious intent of disaboweling him with her bare hands. Whoa! Roger snared her deftly and lifted her off her feet. Calm down, sweetheart. He didn't mean... I could have told him that if he hadn't learned it by sharing a household with a sort of Frasers for years, it wouldn't do any good to tell him now, that the last thing you should say to one in full roar was calm down, like putting out an oil fire on your stove by throwing a glass of water on it. He did, Mandy bellowed, struggling madly in her father's grip. I hate him. He ruined it. It's all ruined. Lego, I hate you too. She started kicking dangerously in the vicinity of her father's crotch, and he instinctively held her out away from him. Jamie reached out, wrapped an arm around her middle, gathered her in, and put a big hand on the nape of her neck. Hush, Nan, he said, and she did. She was panting like a little steam engine, red-faced and teary, but she stopped. We'll step outside for a moment, shall we? He said to her, and nodded to the rest of the assembly. No one's to touch her book while we're gone. Do you hear? There was a faint murmur of assent, succeeded by total silence as Jamie and Mandy disappeared into the night. So, Jem doesn't care, what's happening with Mandy. He just wants to make sure the cookies survived. Fanny is worried that Jamie will give her a whooping. Roger is soothing an upset Bree, being a very good hubby to Bree. And Germain is feeling bad, thinking it's his fault. And he sees Breeze is upset, and right away, he's taking the blame. And so Claire, tells him that Jamie will make all well, and Germain says, oh, and it says he relaxed at once, having total faith in his grandfather's ability to charm anything from an unbroken horse to a rabid hedgehog, which I kind of loved. So Jamie does make all well. He's pointing out stars with Mandy outside, which is so cute. And I just love seeing her bonding with Jamie. If you all remember, I don't know if you do or not, but I have really wanted, was one of the things I wanted was some Jamie and Mandy bonding moments. So I really wanted to see that because he had this little girl that he never got to have as a little girl. And so he can kind of really bond with Mandy. And I could see her setting that up because, she made the book Grandfather Tales where he's holding the little girl on his knee. She's the one that could see him before when he would appear his ghost. She was the one that would talk to him. So you kind of feel like she was setting up a little bond there between them. It must be kind of surreal for Bree to see him interact with her a little bit, seeing how he is with a little girl, it must kind of make her feel a little bit nostalgic to know this is how he would have been as a dad with me, if I was little with him. Not that she's going to cast off Frank, but I think it lets her see what she might have missed growing up in this as a little girl, as him as a father to her as a little girl. So Claire is smiling, seeing her family all taking care of each other, cookies and milk are ready, and we get this cute scene. And again, Mandy steals the show. So pick up back where I want to read here. With his own good instincts, Jamie waited until the mob had reassembled and were eagerly sniffing warm cookies, and he carried Mandy back in and deposited her among the other children without comment. 34, he said, assessing the array at a glance, one for Augie. Yes, how do you do that? It's no difficult, Sassenach. He leaned over the platter and closed his eyes, inhaling beatifically. It's easier than goats and sheep. After all, cookies didn't have legs. Legs? Danny said, puzzled. Oh, aye, he said, opening his eyes and smiling at her. Do you know the number of goats you have? You just count the legs and divide by 4. Sit, I said briskly. Jem, pour the milk, please. And how many cookies does each person get then, Mr. Know-it-all? 3, the boys chorused. A dissenting opinion from Mandy, who thought everyone should have 5, was quelled without incident, and the whole room relaxed into a quiet orgy of cold, creamy milk and sweet-scented crumbs. I love that. Now then, Jamie said, and paused, carefully brushing the crumbs off his shirt front into his palm, licking them off. Now then, he repeated, Amanda tells me she can read her book by herself. Will you maybe read it to us, Leannon? Yes. And then, with only a brief interruption for wiping of sticky hands and face, she was ensconced once more in her mother's arms, but this time the vivid orange book was in her own lap. She opened the cover and glared at her audience. Everybody shut up, she said firmly. I read. How cute is she? Oh my God. She's so freaking cute. The whole scene is just priceless. I am in on anything with wee Mandy. I am in on any scene with wee Mandy. So then everyone goes back home. In the case of the Murrays, they go back to their house, or the kids all get to now sleep under their new roof. And Jamie, Claire, and Roger Bray are up, and it's present time, and out comes Mandy's bag, and we readers all kind of like rub our hands together in anticipation. I guess Mandy was she was waiting for the right moment to give these gifts, or maybe she had to set aside that she would do it when they had the hearth blessing. I'm not sure, because they've been there a month, why now? I guess this is like she was waiting for a ceremonial time to give these gifts. So first, she presents Claire with a 1977 Merck manual. Now, I've included pictures in this post of the editions of books that Bree brought, except for Frank's, of course, in the description of the post. So if you want to take a look. Seeing Claire's reaction to this, I also, well, you know what, that's for tomorrow, never mind. I think this is the most truly excited about a gift I have seen Claire get. It's right up there with Jamie giving her the medical chest and drums, but I think she was even more excited about this. She was practically trembling with anticipation when she saw what this gift was. She could barely let go of it enough to let Jamie even look at it. And so it's really the perfect gift for Claire. It was from 1977, a year that Claire will never get to see herself. So it's really Claire's own future that she never saw. She, to her, that's like far in the future. 1977. So it's more advanced than the state of medicine was in Claire's own time of 1968. 9 whole years of medical advancement and knowledge since she left. She clasps it to her bosom, and later we see her fondling the blue pebble cover of her baby, she calls it. And I think that's a little nod to Diana, who always talks about carrying one of her own brand new books around with her in the car and fondling it and feeling the cover and looking at it, So I kind of feel like that's a little nod to her. So it's Jamie's turn next, and for him, they pull out the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And so she says, and she said, smiling at Jamie, for you, Dad. She pulled out a small, thick paper bag and handed it to him. And for you, she pulled out a second book to follow the first. And this one's for you, too. And she brings out the third. They all go together, Roger said gruffly. It's all one story, but printed in 3 volumes. Oh, I? Jamie turned over one of the books gingerly, as though afraid it might disintegrate in his hands. It's glued, is it? The binding? Aye, Roger said, smiling. It's called a paperback. That sort of wee book, they're cheap and light. Jamie weighed the book with his hand and nodded, but he was already reading the back cover. Frodo Baggins, he read aloud and looked up, baffled. A Welshman? Not exactly. Brianna thought the tale might speak to ye, Roger said, his smile deepening as he looked at her. I think she's right. Jamie gathered the trio of books together and with a thoughtful look at the sticky fingerprints Mandy had left on her cup, put them on the top of my simples closet. He kissed Bree and nodded toward her bag. Thank ye kindly. I ken they'll be braw. So now I have an embarrassing confession to make. I have never read or watched the movies of Lord of the Rings. I know. Shame. Shame. I'm giving myself the shame bell. Shame. So I need you guys to explain to me in the comments why these are the perfect books to give Jamie, and why does Roger say, Brianna thought the tale might speak to ye. I think she's right. What about these books make them so perfect to give Jamie? Can somebody explain it to me that's maybe read them? Because I haven't read them. So it's one of those ships that I missed, when that was the heyday of Lord of the Rings. So we find out later she brought Jemmy a book too, which is The Scientific American Boy. When Diana was asked about that book, she said, this is Diana talking, The Scientific American Boy was one of my husband's favorite childhood books, which he described to me several times. So I found a copy of it for his 60th birthday. So remember also that she dedicated this book to Doug. So she included his favorite childhood book in the book. So I kind of like that little nod there as well. So now the big reveal. Jamie wants to know what Brianna brought for herself. She says, well, mostly tools, small tools, she said, mostly things that exist now but of a better quality, or that I couldn't get it here without a lot of trouble and expense. So most of us have figured that in her bag as one of the things was small tools. A lot of us figured that for Brianna. So we were right on that score. So then Jamie says, what, nay books, he asked, smiling. You'll be the only illiterate of the family? Bree was already flushed with pleasure and excitement, but grew noticeably pinker at the question. Well, just the one. She glanced at me, cleared her throat, and reached into the almost empty bag. Oh, I said. Then the tone of my voice made Jamie look at me rather than at the hard-bound book in its plastic-covered dust jacket. The Soul of a Rebel, it said. The Scottish Roots of the American Revolution by Franklin W. Randall, Ph.D. Bree was looking at Jamie, a small anxious frown between her brows, but at this she turned to me. I haven't read it yet, she said. But you, either of you, she added, glancing between me and Jamie, are welcome to read it any time if you want to. I met Jamie's eyes, and his brows lifted briefly, but then he looked away. Wow! So this is interesting. Is this book, look at the title of this book. It's pretty much Jamie. That's Jamie. The Soul of a Rebel, The Scottish Roots of the American Revolution. Is this book, all about Jamie, pretty much? Holy moly, it sounds like that. So I hope she doesn't make us wait forever to find out the specifics of what's in this book, but I can't wait to find out all the little Frank nuggets in this book. Now, it also has Frank's picture on it, but Jamie doesn't seem to comment on his picture, which kind of surprised me. I was expecting a big, I don't know, kind of tension or freak out or something from Jamie, him to kind of scrunch his shoulders or something when he saw the picture, and he doesn't even say anything, which kind of surprises me. So how I always say that Diana gives authorial nods and opinions, on writing, on books, on being an author, on whatever in her books. So we get a little bit of that here toward the end. First here we have this. She says, I sat down beside Jamie on a large sack of dried beans to gloat over my Merck manual for a few minutes. He was turning Frank's book over in his hands with a ginger air indicating he thought it might explode, but put it aside and smiled when he saw me fondling the blue pebble cover of my new baby. She is so loving this book. Do you need to read it through from the beginning to the end like the Bible, he said, or will you just wait till someone comes to you with blue spots and look that up? Oh, both, I assured him, weighing the chunky book in my hand. So some of the things you always see is discussion about when people talk about skipping sections of the book, right? Or just going to the parts they want to read. So I feel like this was kind of a little nod to that. That's not like kind of the thing to do. And so then we get this bit. She says to him, "What about your books? Do they look interesting?" She nodded towards a stack of thick paperbacks, and his face lit up. He picked up the first volume and riffled the pages slowly, and then turned back to the first page and read in a husky voice, "Concerning hobbits. This book is largely concerned with hobbits, and from its pages a reader may discover much of their character and a little of their history." That's just the prologue, I assured him. You can skip that if you like. He shook his head, eyes fixed on the page and smiling. If the author thought it was worth his writing it down, then it's worth me reading it. I didn't mean to miss a single word. Okay, now that is definitely Diana's authorial intrusion right there, and I love it. Good job, Jamie. No skipping prologues, no skipping stuff, period. That is like against that's a cardinal sin to me. You people that skip out there, if you're listening, make sure that you listen to Jamie. Don't skip anything the author wants you to read. If she wrote it or he wrote it, make sure that you read it because it was important to them to write it. So I kind of love that. She says, "A sharp pang struck me then." Seeing the reverential way in which he handled the book, turning over the pages with a delicate forefinger. A book, any book, had a meaning well beyond its contents for a man who lived years at a time with little or no access to the printed word, and only memory of stories to provide him and his companions escape from desperate circumstances. I kind of love that. It kind of like brings our appreciation of books, like look how much they treasured having a book, how much it meant to them, so they decide that they will do what they used to do when they were a young married couple at Lollybrock with the older kids now, and take turns reading Lord of the Rings at night, which I really love. I really wish families had time and inclination to do that kind of stuff now. Maybe some do. Mine doesn't. Mine would just look at me like I was nuts if I tried to do that. So then they end talking about Frank's book. He made a low Scottish noise indicating the content and set the book down next to the hardcover book Bree had brought for herself. Frank's book. My already tenderized heart squeezed a little, at once happy and sad that she had brought it to remember him, to bring him with her into this new life. Jamie saw me looking at the book and made another Scottish noise, this one indicating cautious interest. I nodded at the soul of a rebel. Are you going to read that one? I didn't, Ken, he admitted, glancing at it. Have you read it, Sassenach? No. I felt a small qualm at the admission, the fact that while I had read all of Frank's articles and books and essays during what I thought of as our first marriage, I hadn't been able to bring myself to read any of the books he'd written during our second marriage, save a brief look at one that dealt with the aftermath of Culloden when I began to search for the men of Lollybrock. This one was published after I came back, I said, my throat tight. It was the last book he wrote. I've not even seen it before. I wondered for an instant whether Bree had picked that one because of the photograph of Frank on it was what he looked like the last time she saw him, or whether she'd chosen it mostly for the title. Jamie caught the tone of my voice and looked sharply at me, but he said nothing and picked up Mandy's green eggs and ham for further perusal. So this is the last book that Frank wrote. Likely it started around the same time. He probably started writing it around the same time he wrote the Dearest Deadeye letter. Likely, what do you think of this book? We kind of know from the excerpt that Diana read at her launch that Jamie's name is in it 14 times. Jamie seemed to think in that excerpt that she read that Frank meant for him to read it. So a couple questions you can consider and comment. First of all, let me know about the Lord of the Rings and why that's perfect for Jamie. But tell me, do you think that was Frank's intent that he would read this book? Why do you think Claire was at once happy and sad that she had brought it to remember him, to bring him with her into this new life? Why would Claire be sad about that? Let me know your thoughts on this chapter, which I felt like was a big warm hug to me. And I will be back probably tomorrow with chapter 10, and we'll finish out this section. Bye.